We read today from Luke chapter 22, verses 31 to 34. For those of you who like to read along, Luke 22. Have you ever done something you wish you could take back, but you can't? A moment, a sentence, a decision that seemed to change everything, and now it's done. Well, today we meet someone in our Conversations with Jesus series who experiences this very thing. It's failure, the kind of failure you can't fix. You can't go back and undo it. The kind that has the power to eat you up and make you wonder about the future. It's the failure you can't undo. We've been on a journey this Lenten season, exploring conversations with Jesus, right? And these conversations have taken us through a series of encounters, different people in different moments, each person coming face to face with Jesus and walking away deeply affected. We've moved from curiosity to longing to attachment. And last week it was what? Costly devotion, right? It was the woman who had no words adequate for what she felt, so she poured out her most precious possession, that ointment in the alabaster jar, and she wept. She came from the outside, so to speak, from the bottom, and she knew exactly who she was. She knew she needed mercy. She didn't need to be told. But today, we meet someone who does not know this yet. And his name is Peter. And the emotional register of our Lenten series here shifts this morning downward. I mean, not upward toward the light, but downward. The conversation this week is about failure, about coming failure, about the kind of failure that Peter is completely, utterly, confidently convinced will never happen to him. But it will, and it does. What do we do with failure? We'll hear now the word of the Lord as recorded in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verses 31 to 34. Jesus said, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Peter said to him, "Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death." And Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I have 3 ideas for you today. And the first one is failure. The failure you don't see coming. And the second idea is confidence. Confidence without clarity. The third idea, the prayer that holds. So we have failure, confidence, and the prayer that holds. So let's start with the failure you don't see coming. Well, let's begin with the scene. Jesus and his disciples have just shared the Lord's Supper. It's a meal of extraordinary spiritual intimacy, heavy with meaning. Something real and holy happened at that table. The disciples experienced it. They feel close to Jesus tonight, close to one another, bonded in the way that serious and sacred moments bond people. The kind of evening that makes you feel as though nothing could break you apart. Something deeply spiritual indeed happened. And it's precisely into that warmth that Jesus turns to Simon Peter with a warning. "Simon, Simon," Jesus says. Notice, not Peter, but Simon. Jesus uses the old name, the pre Christian name, the name this man carried before Jesus called him, before he called him the rock, before any of it. It's a small signal, but it's an unmistakable one. Something is coming that will reach back before all the growth, before all the declarations of loyalty, all the way back to the old Simon who is still in there. Simon, Simon, Jesus says, Satan has demanded permission to have you, all of you, it's plural, that he might sift you like wheat. Sifted. To be sifted like wheat means to be shaken violently, forcefully, so that the chaff falls apart from the grain and it falls away. I mean, Satan has been busy in this chapter. Earlier in the gospel, we're told that he entered into Judas, right? And that's a quote. He entered into Judas. And now Jesus tells us the prince of darkness has wanted all of them to be tested. The adversary, Satan, turns his focused attention to another member of Jesus' inner circle, to Peter, who is close to Jesus and critical to what comes next. The adversary has made his case. He has requested access. And Jesus does not tell Peter that he denied the request. He says something far more remarkable. But I have prayed for you. I have prayed for you. Before the failure, before the denial, before the charcoal fire in the courtyard, before the accusation, before the 3 times, before the rooster, Jesus has already gone to the Father on Peter's behalf. So by the time Peter opens his mouth to say, I do not know him, the prayer has already been prayed. And this sentence of Jesus, but I have prayed for you, it's the theological heart of this passage. So we need to stay with it for a few moments. So we notice first, Jesus does not prevent the failure. Peter will deny him 3 times before morning, exactly as Jesus predicted. What Jesus prays for is not that Peter will not stumble. Rather, notice Jesus prays that Peter's faith will not completely, finally, irrevocably fail. That underneath the collapse, something will hold. Well, Peter's faith will fall, right? But it will not disappear. Everything depends on the difference between those 2 things, falling and disappearing. But think about the sequence here. Jesus prays first. Jesus is not reacting. He sees the whole arc, right? The bravado at supper, the sleep in the garden, the arrest, the little campfire in the courtyard outside the high priest's home where Peter and others gathered while waiting to hear what happens. And then those questions that came at him, aren't you one of them? The denials, the tears, all of it. Jesus has seen that arc and he has already brought it before the Father. He's already secured what lies on the other side of the failure. In other words, Jesus' intercession to the Father precedes the failure. This is grace, not earned, not requested, not conditional on Peter getting it right. It's grace. It's love from the one who loves us endlessly. Well, the writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 4, describes Jesus as our eternal high priest, the one who empathizes fully with our weakness. who opens the way to God's throne of grace so that we can receive mercy and help in our time of need. And likewise, the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8 that Jesus, risen and seated at God's right hand, intercedes for us. Intercedes, present tense, ongoing action. The Apostle John in John 17 records Jesus as saying that he prays for us. And so all of them are describing something real and ongoing, this watching over, empathizing, interceding, protecting. They describe the same thing that Jesus was doing for Peter that night. And now it's extended forward through time, extended to you and to me. Well, later, as an old man, the Apostle John finds just the right word for this. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 1, John, the apostle, calls Jesus our advocate. Advocate. In other words, Jesus goes to the wall for us. He has our backs. He makes a case for us, and he speaks what we cannot speak. He prays for us to be kept safe from evil. To put it another way, our salvation and our spiritual well-being are continually supported by Jesus's perfect prayers. Now just think about that for a moment. Jesus prays and has prayed for us, for Peter, for you, and for me. Even in our failures, he prays. Jesus does not give up on us. I mean, one of his best friends, Peter, ghosted him later that night. That's how we'd say it in our modern parlance, right? He ghosted him, and still Jesus does not give up on him. Jesus, he's the most loyal friend that any of us will ever have. He prays for us continually. Well, let's talk about confidence without clarity. Confidence without clarity. So, in this conversation in Luke 22, Peter, of course, does not know any of this. And that's precisely the problem. Jesus has just told him and the others clearly what is coming. He had told them earlier that he would be betrayed and arrested. And he tells Peter here in this conversation that Peter will fail him. The prediction is explicit, right? It's right there in verse 34. And Peter's confidence in himself is breathtaking. He says, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Peter means every word of it, right? He does. His love for Jesus is genuine. It's bold, it's deep, it's the kind of love that genuinely believes it can endure everything, which is exactly what makes this so painful. I mean, it's not that Peter is insincere, but that his sincerity outruns his self-knowledge. Now, compare Peter with the woman we met last week. The woman, right, with the hair. She wipes Jesus' feet with her hair. I mean, she came to Jesus from the bottom, you could say. She knew who and what she was. I mean, she didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. She wept and gave everything she had because she understood fully that she needed mercy. Well, we could say that Peter's coming from the top, right? From loyalty, from strength, from confidence in his own devotion. Love and dependence are not the same thing. Peter has learned to love, but he has not yet learned to fully depend on Christ. You know, the most dangerous failures are not the ones we fear. The most dangerous failures are the ones that we're certain we would never commit. When Matthew's account of this same exchange, Peter pushes further. He says, even if everyone else falls away, I will never fall away. And quickly, the other disciples say the same thing. Yes, yes, we'll stand with you. They're influenced by Peter's bravado, his strong confidence. And there's something almost unbearable about imagining Jesus on the other side of that moment, hearing these promises, knowing what they're worth, loving these men. I mean, imagine the pain that Jesus must have felt. And yet, Jesus will carry what these men, these friends of his, cannot yet carry. He'll carry the failure that they can't undo. The most confident voice at the table that night will be the first one to deny Christ. And this is not, it must be said, a story about Peter being a bad disciple or a weak disciple. I mean, he is in many ways the best of them, right? He's bold, he's the most devoted, he's most willing to go forward. The issue, you see, is not his commitment. The problem is that he has never been sifted in quite this way before. And so he does not yet know what is in him when the pressure comes. And that describes most of us, doesn't it? We don't know when we will be sifted and what's in us when the pressure comes. Well, Paul knew this danger well. I mean, Paul warns in Corinthians, he says, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And so Lent, the season we're in right now, it's exactly the season for that word. It's that word from God. I mean, it's not to produce despair, but to produce honesty. And we need to confess, we're more like Peter than we tend to admit, more capable of failure than we suppose, more in need of grace than we know. And so this brings me to my last point. I want to call this the prayer that holds. The prayer that holds. So if you don't remember anything else, remember this. We come back to the center of this text, to the 5 words that carry everything in this passage. And they come in verse 32. And here they are. But I have prayed for you. But I have prayed for you, Jesus says. Well, that word but is doing enormous work, isn't it? Jesus says, Satan demanded to sift you, but I have prayed for you. Everything pivots on this word. This is the and yet of the gospel. Once you start noticing this pivot, this and yet is everywhere in the gospels. Jesus died, and yet the Father raised him. The disciples scattered, and yet Jesus promises to meet them in Galilee. Peter denied, and yet Jesus calls him the rock on which the church will be built. I mean, failure is real in this text. It's not minimized, it's not spiritualized away. But here's the important point: the failure is not the final word. And there's something remarkable in what Jesus says next. He says to Peter, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Verse 32. Not if you turn again, but when you turn again, when you turn back. And so you notice Jesus is not speaking hopefully. He's speaking with the certainty of someone who has already settled the matter. He issues a commission in the very breath that contains the prediction of failure, which means he has already decided that Peter's story does not end at the courtyard campfire. Peter's story does not end with his failure. Now, the Greek word for turned here It's epistrapho, to turn around, to return, to come back. It's an important word. It's the same word used in the context of the prodigal son, who you could translate as who came to himself and turned toward home. So, likewise, Peter, where once his courage and his faith failed and he turned away from Christ, the power of God will turn him back around to where he belongs, facing Jesus in faith once again. And so you notice our faith is not self generated, it never is. It's a gift worked in us by the Spirit in answer to Christ's intercession. The one who holds Peter's faith in place is not Peter, it's Jesus. It's Jesus praying for Peter and the Spirit responding. So Peter's faith is preserved not because he's strong enough, but because Jesus is faithful enough. Did you get that? Peter's faith is preserved not because he is strong enough, but because Jesus is faithful enough. And now, very briefly, let's consider another man at the table of the Last Supper that night. Judas. Judas, he also failed catastrophically, deliberately, in a way that makes Peter's denial look like a stumble. And in the aftermath, Matthew tells us that Judas felt the full weight of what he had done. Judas, he went back to the priest, threw down the silver, said, "I have sinned." And like Peter, he also denied Christ, right? He knew it. But he ran with that knowledge not toward Jesus, but inward into despair. Judas could not bring himself to turn back to Jesus. I mean, Peter also ran. He also wept in the dark. He also felt crushed under the weight of what he had done. But Peter eventually turned back, and Jesus was there. So the difference between them is not the size of their failure. I mean, both men failed Jesus miserably. I mean, the difference isn't even the depth of regret. The difference is the direction after the failure. One man turned inward and found only himself and his despair. The other one turned back to Jesus and found grace. There are failures in our lives that we carry quietly. We know what they are. A relationship we damaged and we can't repair it. Words we can't take back. A moment that called for courage and found us somewhere else. An opportunity that will not come again. I mean, many of these, perhaps most, really, we can and should try to make amends. I mean, that is true. But there are some that we cannot. They're failures we can't undo. But these do not mean that we are undone. So Jesus is not offering to erase the past or reset the clock. What Jesus offers is something far greater. He works in and through and sometimes despite our failures to accomplish what we could not have imagined. The same Peter who denied Jesus 3 times at a charcoal fire will stand before thousands at Pentecost and preach the risen Christ. The failure does not disappear from the record, but it does not have the last word either. And not because Peter fixes it himself, but because Jesus prays, the Spirit moves, and what looks like the end is, in fact, a turning point. Our failures are real, but they are not final. because Christ has already spoken for us. Well, let me close with this. Jesus looked at Peter that night. He saw the denial coming, every word of it, and he still said, I have prayed for you. And Jesus says the same thing to each one of us. There are things we cannot undo, but there is one who has already acted. The rooster crows and still the grace comes. Still the shepherd calls. Still the Spirit turns us back toward home. May each one of us cling to Christ, finding our true confidence in the one who loves us endlessly. Amen.